I was 10 the first time I stayed at Grandma's house. My parents were going on some anniversary trip, and instead of taking me along, they dumped me in the middle of nowhere with a woman I barely knew. I mean, sure, she was my grandma, but we'd never been close. She lived in this old Victorian house, huge, creaky, and buried in the woods like it was trying to hide from the rest of the world. My mom used to say it was charming. I thought it looked like the kind of place where bad things happened in horror movies. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was heavy, like the house was holding its breath. The wooden floors groaned beneath my sneakers, the walls seemed too close, and the dim yellow light from the antique lamps barely reached the corners. Grandma, all hunch and frail, led me up the staircase to the second floor. "You can sleep in the guest room, dear," she said. Her voice was soft but firm. "Bathrooms down the hall. My room's across from yours." Then she turned and pointed at a door at the very end of the hall. "But you must never go in there. That room is off limits." I stared at the door. It was plain, no weird markings, no strange locks, just an old wooden door like the rest. But something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. "Why?" I asked. Her pale blue eyes flicked to mine. "Because I said so." And that was that. I spent the first night lying awake listening. The house didn't sleep. It creaked, it whispered, it made noises that had no business coming from an empty hallway. But worst of all, that door. At some point past midnight, I heard something from inside. Not a bang, not a knock, just the faintest sound, like a breath. I squeezed my eyes shut. It was just an old house settling. That's what my dad always said about weird noises. Houses settle, kid. Yeah, well, this one sounded like it was settling into something bad. Days passed. I did what I could to distract myself, playing in the overgrown backyard, watching Grandma's old VHS tapes, flipping through books that smelled like dust and time. But every night the house came alive. Every night that door felt closer. One evening I finally asked Grandma again. "What's in there?" She stiffened. "Nothing for you to worry about." That wasn't an answer. But what's? Her spoon clattered against her plate. "Enough, boy." I shut up. But that night I heard it again, a sound from inside the room. And this time, the door handle moved. Just a twitch, a soft, deliberate rattle, like someone testing if it was locked. I didn't sleep. Morning couldn't come fast enough. That day my cousin Jonah arrived. He was a couple of years older than me, taller and full of bad ideas. I told him about the door the second he walked in. He grinned. "So let's open it." I shook my head. Grandma said no. Jonah scoffed. "Jude, what's she gonna do? She's like 90. She'll know." He rolled his eyes but didn't push it, at least, not at first. Instead, we spent the next few days goofing off, exploring the woods, making up ghost stories, playing hide and seek. Then, one night, I woke up to Jonah shaking my shoulder. "Come on," he whispered. "I found something." He led me down the hall, stopping in front of that door. And in his hand was a key. "I swiped it from her dresser," he whispered, grinning. My stomach dropped. "We can't." But Jonah was already sliding the key into the lock. It turned. The door creaked open, and inside there was nothing. Just an empty room. 4 blank walls, wooden floors, and dust swirling in the pale moonlight. No furniture. No old trunks. No monsters. Jonah let out a breath. "Seriously, all that for?" Then the door slammed shut behind us. The lock clicked, and the whispering began. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because my throat was raw the second the whispers started. They came from everywhere. Soft, slithering voices curling through the darkness like fingers reaching for us. Jonah banged on the door. "Hey, let us out." The whispers rose, overlapping, pressing in. I couldn't make out words, if they were words, but they felt like something I shouldn't be hearing, something not meant for us. Then, as suddenly as they'd started, silence. Jonah was panting beside me. I could hear his pulse in the thick quiet. "Jude," he said finally, "what the hell was that?" I didn't answer. My eyes were adjusting to the dark, scanning the empty room. It looked normal. The walls were bare. The floor was cold beneath my feet. No furniture, no windows, nothing. And yet, the air was wrong. Thick, heavy, like the room was filled with something we couldn't see. Jonah tried the door again. Locked. He rattled the knob. "Grandma's gonna kill us." I wasn't thinking about Grandma. I was thinking about the whispers, and about the fact that for a split second before the door slammed, I could have sworn the room wasn't empty. We weren't trapped long. Maybe a few minutes, maybe longer. It was hard to tell in the dark. But then, just as suddenly as it had locked, the door creaked open. Jonah and I froze. Beyond the threshold, the hallway was pitch black. The air outside seemed colder. We didn't hesitate. We bolted. The second we crossed the threshold, Jonah yanked the door shut behind us, locking it with shaking hands. Then we ran to our rooms. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to forget the way the whispers had felt against my skin, like breath on the back of my neck. But the worst part, I could still hear them. Not loud, not clear, just the faintest suggestion of a voice, somewhere deep inside the walls, whispering my name. The next morning, Grandma said nothing. No mention of the door, no scolding, no suspicious glances, just breakfast, same as always. It was worse than being caught. Jonah and I barely spoke. Every time we locked eyes, it was like we both knew. We'd let something out. That night, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. And then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath. A shadow pooled beneath the crack. And then, in the softest voice, so quiet it could have been my own imagination, I heard it. A whisper. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The whisper slithered under my door, curling around my ears, sinking into my skull like it belonged there. "Come back." I squeezed my eyes shut. I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming. Then, tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks against my door. Not Grandma. She never knocked. Not Jonah either. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, heart hammering against my ribs. The shadow beneath the door shifted. And then silence. I stayed awake until morning. By daylight, everything felt almost normal. Almost. I found Jonah in the kitchen, shoveling cereal into his mouth like he hadn't been whispered to in the dead of night. "You hear anything weird last night?" I asked. He froze for half a second, just long enough for me to know the answer. Then he shook his head. "Nah. Liar." Grandma sat at the table, drinking her usual cup of tea. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I think it's best if you boys stay inside today." Jonah and I glanced at each other. "Why?" I asked. She stirred her tea. "Storm's coming." I looked out the window. The sky was clear pale blue. No clouds. No wind. Jonah shoved another spoonful of cereal in his mouth and muttered, "Guess we're staying inside." We did not stay inside. By noon, we were out in the woods behind the house, stepping over fallen branches, making our way to the old, half-rotted treehouse Jonah had discovered on our second day here. Neither of us mentioned the room, or the whispers. but they lingered between us every and there. Jonah finally broke the silence. You think she knows? I kicked at a rock. Grandma? He nodded. I thought about the way she hadn't mentioned the door, how she should have known we'd gone in there, and yet nothing. She knows, I said. Jonah swallowed. Then why hasn't she said anything? I didn't have an answer. But I was starting to understand something I didn't want to admit. The rule about that room, it wasn't to keep us out. It was to keep something else in. And now it was loose. That night, the whispers came back, louder, stronger. They weren't just outside my door anymore. They were inside my room. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to block out the voices, but they grew, pressing in from all sides, rising like a storm. Then, in the middle of it all, my bed shifted. I froze. Something was on it with me. I felt the weight near my feet, pressing the mattress down. Then slowly it moved, crawling, up, toward me. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The whispers slid beneath my skin, curling around my bones, filling my ears with words I couldn't understand. Then right next to my ear, a voice, clearer than before. You let me out. My breath hitched. The weight vanished. The whispers stopped. And then Jonah screamed. I threw myself out of bed, racing down the hall to his room. His door was open. He was sitting up in bed, drenched in sweat, shaking. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. Jonah. His head snapped toward me. His face was pale, his lips bloodless. They were here, he whispered. He cut himself off, shaking harder. Then suddenly his expression changed. His face smoothed out, eyes dull, mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm fine, he said. I stepped back. What? I said I'm fine. His voice was wrong. Flat, empty, like something was using his mouth to speak. I felt it then. The air around him was wrong, like something else was in the room with us, watching, waiting. Jonah's head tilted, his mouth stretched into a wider grin, and then he laughed. Low, hollow, not his laugh, something else's, something inside him. I took another step back. Jonah just grinned wider and whispered, You let me out. Jonah wasn't Jonah anymore. I knew it the second he smiled, that stretched, empty grin, like a puppet trying to mimic a person. He stood up slowly, rolling his shoulders like he was testing how his body moved. I backed toward the doorway. Jonah. His eyes flicked to me. There was something wrong about them, too dark, too deep. Yeah, his voice was casual, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just changed. I swallowed hard. You screamed. He blinked. Did I? I wanted to run, wanted to wake Grandma, anyone. But I couldn't leave him. Not yet. I forced my voice to stay steady. Are you okay? He tilted his head. I feel better than I ever have. And then, before I could say anything else, he lunged. I barely had time to move before his hand slammed against the doorframe beside me. Too fast, too strong. I stumbled back. Jonah. He grinned. Why are you scared? He asked. I couldn't answer, because it wasn't him anymore. Something else had crawled inside his skin, something we'd let out. I ran. I don't remember deciding to, I just did. My feet pounded against the wooden floor as I sprinted down the hall, heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, Jonah's laughter echoed, low, curling with something not human. I threw myself into Grandma's room, slamming the door shut. She was already sitting up in bed watching me. She wasn't surprised. She knew. Her voice was calm. You opened it, didn't you? I couldn't answer. I was too busy gasping for air. Pressing myself against the door like that would keep Jonah, or whatever he was now, out. Grandma sighed. You let it out. She moved fast for an old woman. 1 second, she was in bed. The next, she was yanking open a drawer, pulling out something wrapped in cloth. A rusted iron key. She turned to me, eyes sharp. Where is he? I swallowed. I don't know. A thud against the door made me jump. Then Jonah's voice, soft, amused. Are you hiding from me? I couldn't breathe. Grandma didn't even flinch. She just motioned for me to follow her. Come. Now. She moved toward the hall, holding the key tight in her wrinkled hand. The second she opened the door, Jonah was standing there, his head tilted. Oh, he murmured, eyeing the key. You do know. Then, before I could react, he smiled, and the lights went out. Everything exploded into motion. I felt Grandma grab my wrist, dragging me forward through the darkness. Jonah's laughter echoed, shifting, coming from everywhere at once. I tripped over something, his arm. But Grandma yanked me upright, pulling me toward the one place I didn't want to go. Back to the room. I dug my heels in. No. It's the only way. Her grip tightened. Don't listen to it. The way she said it, not him, made my stomach turn. Jonah, or whatever was in him, was right behind us. I could feel it. The moment we reached the door, Grandma shoved the key into the lock. Her hands were shaking. Behind me, Jonah whispered, You can't put me back. The door swung open. The room was different now. No longer empty. It was waiting. The whispers inside rose like a storm. Jonah's hand clamped around my wrist. The moment he touched me, it was like being drowned in sound. I saw it, the thing that had been waiting, a shape of nothing, curled in the dark for so long, silent, patient, hungry, waiting for someone to let it out. It wasn't just one thing, it was many. And they had Jonah now. They were wearing him. But they wanted me too. I screamed. Grandma shoved Jonah backward. He fell into the dark. And the door slammed shut. Silence. A terrible, aching silence. The lock clicked. Grandma sagged against the door, breathless. I stood there shaking. Jonah was gone. I couldn't process it, couldn't understand. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Grandma didn't look at me, just pressed a hand against the wood. You should never have opened it. The next day, Jonah was gone. No one mentioned him. Not Grandma, not my parents, not anyone. Like he'd never existed. But at night, sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear his voice, still hear the whisper, You let me out. And sometimes I hear him knocking. Come back.